I want to meet that lady someday. And invite those of you who would like to join in the bracha to do so. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And as we prepare to immerse ourselves in the final words of Pirkei Avot chapter 5, just the briefest of preambles today, because we're really in a kind of appendix section of Pirkei Avot now, all the way from the tail end of chapter 5 through all of chapter 6. Most people who are far more erudite than I, who have studied this literature and analyzed it from a historical critical perspective, conclude that the last part of chapter 5 and all of chapter 6 appear to be a kind of random assemblage or anthology of teachings that were collected from across the generations of the rabbinic teachers whose words are preserved in the Mishnah, without any heed to particular chronology or thematic unity. So we're really now just in a hodgepodge of nevertheless wise and worthwhile sayings and statements for us to contemplate. Some of these, I think, are going to be familiar to you. You've just sort of picked them up in the course of living a Jewish life, a life connected to synagogue. You will have heard some of these before because they are favorite texts for preachers and teachers and commentators, including very much myself. And almost anything that you've read in the Jewish press will make reference to Pirkei Avot. So this should be fun, most especially the text that we're going to begin with today, which is chapter 5. On Sepharia, it's numbered 22. I explained last week that the specific numeric designations of the Mishnahs, the Mishnayot, individual teachings in Pirkei Avot, differ from edition to edition. So in this edition, for instance, which I know Judy Gross and I use, which is the Newarth edition of the Koren Pirkei Avot, which are lovely. Really, it's nicely bound. Unlike most, I think Judy, you have this one, right?
I don't. In fact, I have the social justice commentary,
okay,
which is very different, and it's confusing because the chapters are not always the same.
Yeah, I know it's frustrating if you're doing a side-by-side Sepharia and a hard copy, and any two hard copies are not going to concur. Well, this is one of my favorites. This has probably become my go-to Pirkei Avot. I mean, please understand, I probably have 11 different translations of Pirkei Avot. They're all worthwhile. They all have commentary. And honestly, the commentary that is provided online on Sepharia is wonderful and really user-friendly. Let's look at this one, though, without any secondary sources. Starting in the Hebrew. Ben Bagbag Omer, one of my favorite rabbi names. So few kids in our religious school are named Bagbag. So Ben Bagbag, the son of Bagbag, said, Hafochba vahafochba decholava. This is fascinating because it is not in Hebrew. It's in Aramaic. You might not know that just by looking at it, because the letters, of course, are Hebrew characters, which are actually Aramaic characters, by the way. Whenever you read the language you think is called Hebrew, you're actually reading the Aramaic character set that was eventually applied to the biblical Hebrew language, which was written in what is now called Paleo-Hebrew. If you ever have any like old Israeli coins, or I think even some modern Israeli coins, you might have some Paleo-Hebrew letters on it. When archaeologists dig up ancient artifacts with inscriptions, it's almost always in the old biblical Hebrew script. So anyway, these are Aramaic words that mean hafoch means to flip over or turn it, hafochba, or turn in it. In other words, consult it. Vahafochba, and do the same thing again, decholava, which means it's all in there. Chola is just the Aramaic form of kol, which means all, like al kol Yisrael, over all of Israel, or I don't know, kol, you see that word all the time. Uva techeze, and in it you shall not just look, but gaze. Look into it, but really gaze, or I think the word that I would use is peruse, right? Really look deeply into it. V'si vuveleva, and that means grow old and gray over it. So, toil, or spend your life toiling in this vineyard of Torah. Although it's funny because the antecedent isn't mentioned, except for the fact, as by way of reminder, that if you remember what we were talking about last week, the last two texts here, the one about the animals and the one about the different ages and stages of life, are really all about Jewish learning. At the end of the day, right? That's either where they lead or how they begin. They're not just statements about, this statement here is not just about the ages and stages of life. It's really about the road of Torah learning and wisdom, which is at least the substrate of what Pirkei Avot wants to present as the life of meaning and honor and goodness, is infused with Torah at every point. So maybe from the way in which it is placed following these two texts, which are about learning, at least to some extent, we can infer that the text itself, this teaching by Ben Bagbag, is also about Torah. And even the word of turning it and turning it is scroll-like. Become old and gray. I don't like therein. That feels like an awkward preposition. I would say over it, in this endeavor, in it. Uminach lo tazua, do not depart from it, or do not stray from it. She'ein lecha midah tova hemena, for you have no better portion than it. So again, if the it is Torah, then the entire premise here is turn it over and over again. Everything is in it. Gaze into it. Grow old over it. Do not stray from it, for you have no better portion than it. It's a lovely teaching. It's one I think we'll spend a little bit of time unpacking this morning, because even though the pshat, the surface meaning, may be self-evident and intuitively obvious, I think there's a lot of depth in this portion too, in what it says that we haven't yet discovered in Pirkei Avot. And additionally, many of us are familiar with the first line of this Mishnah, turn it and turn it again. Some of us are familiar with the second clause of that statement, for everything is in it. Fewer of us are familiar, just from our Jewish memory bank, with look into it, become old and gray over it, do not move away from it, for you have no portion better than it. That might be newer or fresher material for us. So I've removed it from the screen only on the assumption that it's become familiar at this point. And I'd love to just invite open reflection.
What does it refer to? It's
Sandy, I think that it is probably Torah. Though by Torah here, it's funny because, of course, the verb turn it and turn it again immediately calls to mind a scroll, though that wouldn't be the word you use for scroll. Galel or galal would be the verb for rolling a scroll. To roll is the Hebrew root. I'm sure Jane Roberts knows this, gimel lamed lamed. And this is hey, pei, chaf. Hafach, which literally means to flip over, like this, not like this, right? The motion for turning a Torah scroll is to roll the parchment on a wood dowel. The movement for turning a book is actually more hafuch, flipping over something. In modern Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, if you want to say the opposite, in other words, in quotes, if you want to say the opposite, you say lehefech. You say, hey, did you sleep well last night? Lehefech. Quite the opposite. I did not sleep well. Lo yashanti. Lehefech lo yashanti. No, Is he a nice guy? Lehefech, he's a mamzer, that kind of thing. So it's a very common, casual idiom that's used all the time in modern Hebrew. I use it frequently just as a kind of shorthand for quite the opposite, which always sounds a little bit pretentious. Lehefech. So it can mean to invert, flip over, turn around. So that's the sense of hafach, to change in that sense. Turn it is the conventional expression, though. Turn it and turn it again, for everything is in it. And again, by Torah, I'm not sure we're talking about the scroll. In fact, I'm fairly convinced we're not talking about a scroll of Torah, the 5 books of Moses. I think he's talking about accumulated Jewish wisdom, especially if you're going to go with me in the conjecture that this was placed in the order of Mishnayot, in the order of Pirkei Avot, deliberately to connect back to what immediately comes before it. These 2 texts about one be strong as the lion, swift as the eagle. I'm mixing up the verbs and nouns here, but the 4 animals, in order to fulfill the will of your creator and learn Torah, is how that text goes. And then the next one that says, at the age of 5, one is ready to study scripture. At the age of 10, one is ready to study Mishnah. It's clear that we're not talking about a book so much as we're talking about Jewish wisdom, Jewish sacred literature writ large. Where Torah, and I often use Torah to mean this anyway, Torah means not the 5 books of Moses so much as it means accumulated Jewish wisdom. Let's hear from Judy, and then my folks have their hands up too.
Just quickly, in my version, the Torah is in brackets.
Yeah, right.
It's spelled in it, in brackets, the Torah.
Yeah, mine too, by the way. So I'm looking, I don't know if you can see it, but as I'm looking here, it says, Ben Bagbag said, turn it, the Torah, over and over is how they translate it, which is a lovely idiomatic translation. Mom and Dad.
I'm wondering if this serves as the predicate for the yeshivot reluctance or failure or refusal to teach anything other than Torah.
Yeah, I don't know if it serves as the predicate, but it certainly underscores, if that is your overriding ethos about, how Jewish life is to be conducted, especially by the bochers, the young men, who, as I've said countless times in the course of our study, again and again emerge as the kind of invisible but obvious intended audience of Pirkei Avot, yeshiva bochers, young men in training to be teachers of Torah. And that is true here too. I don't know if this wisdom that Ben Bagbag so eloquently dispenses is intended for the common person or for the yeshiva bocher, but I'm almost always going to favor the latter, given what I believe about Pirkei Avot and its originally intended audience. If that is already your ethos, that the essence of life is the study of Torah, Ben Bagbag certainly corroborates, right? I mean, Ben Bagbag says, you just should always be doing this. You can carry that to an illogical extreme, of course. I don't think there's anything in Pirkei Avot, and in fact, we have studied, if you'll recall, we've studied Mishnayot that teach that one should not devote oneself so single-mindedly to study of Torah, Torah meaning Jewish wisdom writ large, to the exclusion of making a living, right? We've read, actually, if you go back go back on the YouTube channel and look at some of our previous sessions, I think in chapters 2 and 3 in particular, we spent a lot of time looking at Mishnayot from Pirkei Avot that attempt to wrestle with the work-study balance, right? Now, the sacred work of learning Torah and the work that's going to put food on the table. So Pirkei Avot is cognizant of the fact that even if you're training for the rabbinate, in the ancient world, let's not forget, the rabbinate was not a paid profession. And in fact, the rabbinate, this may surprise you, the rabbinate was not a paid official in Jewish communities until the 19th century. And that was an adaptation that was adopted from Christian practice, the Christian ministry. And even that is an evolution of church official life where you were basically, furnished your livelihood by the church, but the community wasn't paying their ministers to be paid officials until relatively recently in the development of Western religion. Especially though, where my awareness, my expertise lies in the development of the rabbinate in Jewish history. Not until the middle, maybe even the latter portion of the 19th century, do you have the idea of the rabbi as a paid community official. So for most of Jewish history, rabbis had other jobs that put food on the table. In modern day Haredi life, modern day ultra-Orthodox life, the focus on studying Torah, like taking Ben Bagbag to what I would call the illogical extreme, neglecting to study the previous Avot, the previous Mishnayot in Pirkei Avot that say Torah should coexist with making a living, is actually reflected in present day Haredi practice, where often the women are relied upon to be primary breadwinners for the family. And then, and even that is insufficient for your 10, 11, 12, 13, 17 children to, and therefore many Haredi communities are effectively self-sustaining and government supported, at least in Israel, welfare societies, right? So there is a strong sense of taking care of the community, but it's all internally directed. In Israel, Haredi communities receive substantial assistance from the government that allows the men to study Torah all day long. Torah accumulated, it's mostly Talmud, study Talmud all day long, while in some cases the women work. It's a very interesting inversion of gender politics from what is conventionally understood. There are many, many Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox communities where women are actually educated in secular education far beyond their husbands, which is, again, a bit paradoxical because you have these women who are much more exposed to letters and sciences above and beyond the secular learning of their husbands in order to provide for their families so that their husbands can study Torah all day. And yet, either by community pressure or mutual consent, the people who live in these communities have basically agreed to live in these communities. Michelle.
So I don't see the extremes written in here. For many years, despite listening to rabbinical presentations and explaining of individual texts, they didn't make sense to me because I couldn't get my head into the world of the Talmud. It's finally, at writ large of the rabbinic world, it finally dawned on me, because these people were very often active, Rashi was a vintner, and Maimonides was this great physician and governmental advisor and all of that stuff. And how do you reconcile this? Well, the world is that, except it's not, I don't think that this is that people were not exposed to the world or didn't participate in the world, but it's when as you have your worldview, as you seek your governments, as you seek your laws, as you seek your belief, the guiding word is all from the Torah. As you just pointed out, there are texts in this Torah writ large in the Jewish tradition from Mishnah that tell you also have to teach your children to make a living, to earn a living. So in fact, if this, as you suggest, isn't just Tanakh, but is the broader set of Jewish learning, this is completely consistent. It says, this is your world, this is your worldview, this is your guidance from God and the collective learning of the age of the Jewish sages. And so in fact, it's within that world, we're going to build everything from that. But it does not, I don't think it says you neglect everything else. You still have to live in this world, and so much of what Pirkei Avot has talked about is functioning in this world and setting priorities.
That's right. Yeah. And so that's why, look, if I were, this is an improbable scenario, but if I were in a conversation or debate with a Haredi rabbi or even Haredi layperson who wanted to use Ben Bagbag as a proof text for the absolutism of Torah study in the life of the Jew, I would use text against text and say, well, wait a minute. You can't just selectively choose Ben Bagbag. You have to look at where Ben Bagbag falls in the context of Pirkei Avot and the Mishnah itself. And I think the overriding perspective of Pirkei Avot is one of moderation and balance, which is that even something as venerated as the study of Torah, that what we're seeing from Ben Bagbag is much more of a beautiful 4-point poetic way of expressing the centrality to Torah, to Jewish life, not a literally understood dictum suggesting that Torah study should be the only thing that the pious Jew is concerned with, right? So I agree with you, Michelle. I don't think that the overall purpose of Pirkei Avot substantiates the Haredi view when we identify the Haredi view as Torah study to the exclusion of all else. I want to add here that there are some legends about Ben Bagbag, which, of course, being legends, there's no way to corroborate them. It's just interesting, the Jewish traditions that popped up around this figure. Not much is known about him. First of all, the fact that he is identified as Ben Bagbag, and you notice missing something important, the title rabbi, have led some to suggest that he likely derives from the same era as Hillel and Shammai, noted sages, not identified as rabbis, probably meaning that they are from the 1st century BCE. The term rabbi, as I think I've said several times, does not really come into common parlance in the rabbinic community until the middle of the 1st century of the Common Era, maybe a little bit earlier, but clearly one of the proof texts for that is the Christian scripture. The gospel traditions all refer to Jesus as rabbi. The gospel traditions were written beginning in the year 70 or 71, like around the time or probably just after the destruction of the temple by the Romans. More importantly, around the time that eyewitnesses to the life and times of Jesus of Nazareth were dying out, and so they wanted to preserve their traditions. He's called rabbi, which suggests that the term was common by then, but not Ben Bagbag. He's just Ben Bagbag. Another legend has it that Ben Bagbag and the guy we're going to look at in the next Mishnah, Ben Hehe, are obvious aliases or made-up names that were given to these two sages to protect their identities from Roman persecution, because I believe, according to the legend in the Talmud, they were converts. So it's interesting who needed their identities protected, or that they had left pagan Rome to become Jewish sages, and they were kind of wanted men. There's a whole set of these traditions. I'm not deeply familiar with them, but I encountered them when I was preparing for today. And I didn't go down that rabbit hole. Just thought it was kind of a fun little tidbit. Steve, why don't you unmute yourself, please?
Good morning, Boker Tov.
Boker Tov.
I think what's very helpful in taking the time, and thank you for organizing this course in Pirkei Avot, is going back to one of the things you said could be the centrality of Torah in Jewish life, because I think that's part of the key. If you look at Torah itself and look, for instance, at Lech Lecha, where God directs Abraham, go forth into life, and then attempt to live a religious life. And then in Deuteronomy, near the end of Moses's life, where God is saying, I want people to understand Torah is very close to you. It's not mysterious. You embed it in your life as you live your life in society. So to me, in our efforts to study Pirkei Avot, it's based on the foundation that Torah is directing us. You live a life, you have to create community, and just sitting in a room studying Torah is not what God has commanded us to do.
Amen to that. And, a few hours a week, though, how lovely. On that subject, by the way, we have the next Mishnah. So I'm going to just bring it back on screen. It's fairly self-evident. Ben Hehe, another one of these oddly named sages, Omer, he says, Lefum tsara agra, another Aramaic expression, which is interesting, using what would have been the vernacular in the 1st century BCE, and subsequently. Ben Hehe Omer, Ben Hehe says, or said, Lefum tsara agra, which means according to the labor. Tsa'ar, though, that's a really good word. So tsa'ar in Hebrew, or tsa'ara in Aramaic, tsa'ara connotes exertion and even pain. Literally translated, no pain, no gain. I mean, that is a faithful, word for word, literal translation of this text. Ben Hehe says, no pain, no gain. Or according to the exertion is the gain. Agra, gain, what one benefits from exerting oneself. And obviously, because there are no antecedents here, if this text were just cut out of the context and put in front of you on a piece of paper, you might take it to be generically applied. I would argue that its placement here at the end of chapter 5, with all that has come before it, is a capstone statement about the study of Torah. You're not just exerting yourself lifting barbells or doing your day job. The exertion specifically is intended to mean the labor that you exert in the study of Torah. So comes the reward. So on the other hand, we should not be devoting our entire lives to this to the exclusion of making a living. On the other hand, the more we put into it, the more we get out of it. And that's look, this is almost so obviously true as not to need to be said again, but I say this all the time. I like to make my Torah learning opportunities, both in person and online, as casual, come as you are, and accessible as possible. I really mean it when I say I want new learners to come every week and not to feel that they are intimidated out of inclusion in our study because they've never done it before. So I try to make our teaching and our learning as wide open to all, but I think you have discovered that the sustained effort in joining us for learning each and every week, or as often as you can, produces benefits beyond what a casual encounter with the study of Torah can produce. At least that's been my personal experience. I can't speak for all of you, but I find that doing this week in, week out, today will be the 40th session of Mishnah that we've studied. And that's a milestone, Jewishly speaking. So if you've been with us for most or all of the 40 sessions that we've been learning, I would hope that you can attest to the cumulative benefits of exerting yourself in this direction. So comments, thoughts. Mom and Dad, you can unmute, please.
Is Sa'ara related to Tsuris?
It is not. It's a false cognate. So tsa'ar is the root tzadi ayin resh, which means labor, exertion, but implies pain. And tsara or tsarot, Yiddishized to tsuris, is tzadi resh hey. They may actually be related. I did a little happy dance this week. This shows you what a nerd I am. I got a notification from Safaria that they have completed uploading the entire BDB. Now, BDB is the Brown Driver Briggs Lexicon of Biblical Hebrew. It is the master dictionary of the biblical Hebrew language par excellence. And it's all on Safaria now. And I think they've even engineered it so that you can look up any word in the Tanakh on Safaria in the BDB. And what the BDB does is it's not only a dictionary of the biblical Hebrew language, it is also a concordance. So it shows you every place where a word or a root appears in the biblical literature. And it is an etymological dictionary too. So it tells you where the roots come from. So I would have to look up Tsara and Sa'ar to see if they are at some root level related, which they really could be. But the inclusion of the ayin in root number 1 and not in root number 2, where the root is tsadi resh hey, suggests to me that they actually are different root words meaning slightly different things. Tsarot or tsuris is a word that means suffering. Suffering, pain, exertion are really, as it were, too close for comfort. So I'm, now I'm second guessing my quick-handed dismissal of your conjecture here. I'm going to go do some research on that, or maybe Jane Roberts, my resident Hebrew-phile, or Barbara can help me, and between now and next week figure out whether or not Sa'ar and Sarah are related or false cognates. Okay, so yay, we complete chapter 5 rather, of Pirkei Avot, and we move directly to chapter 6. And if you were pleased by the brevity of the previous 2 Mishnayot, you will not like where we're starting. This is a very long and thorny Mishnah that will take a lot of time to unpack, but that's fun too, because as the exertion, so the reward. Okay, chapter 6, Mishnah number 1. Shanu chachamim bilshon ha-mishnah. The sages taught. Shanu is from the same root as Mishnah. This is just a fun aside. It's one of the many, many Jewish words for teaching. And it comes from, we may have talked about this, but it comes from a body part. So it's the same root as the word teach them to your children in the Ve'ahavta prayer, Vishinantam levanecha, right? You shall teach them faithfully, we say, even though the word faithfully isn't in there. The translators use teach them faithfully to your children in order to connote the special intentionality of teaching that is implied in the word Vishinantam. Don't just teach them casually to your children, but teach them intentionally, faithfully, diligently. It's a little bit of a poetic gloss on Vishinantam. But the fun part is, does anyone know what body part is the root of Vishinantam or Shanu in today's Mishnah? Jane Roberts, please unmute yourself. This will be fun to hear.
I think it's tooth.
Yeah, it's your tooth.
You should grind your teeth on it.
Yeah, right. Grind your teeth is one, or I like the phrase make an impression, right? Because that's also a dental construct, right? Make an impression, or take an impression. That's what your dentist does when he or she needs a mold of your mouth to make orthodontia or any other kind of dental applications. So I love the fact that in Rabbinic Hebrew, the key word, the main word for teaching derives directly from this part of the body, right? It's not, teaching is not something that happens here or here. It's this incredibly bite down hard, make an impression, that kind of teaching. Or as Jane, I think, also aptly says, grind your teeth, or maybe sink your teeth into it, right? Sink your teeth into the following. So that's kind of just a fun aside, putting the text now back on screen and not dwelling too much more on the Hebrew, just a little bit for fun. Shanu chachamim bilshon Mishnah. The sages taught in the language of the Mishnah. That is a weird phrase because it doesn't say anything else, but we'll go on. Baruch shebachar bahem uv'mishnatam. All right, let's go into the English here. Blessed be he, or blessed be the one who chose them and their teaching. My best guess, rather than opening this up for conjecture, I think I'm just going to give you what I think is happening here. I think that this is simply a kind of epigram or formulaic way of beginning the final chapter of the Mishnah. It's sort of like acknowledging a debt of gratitude to the sages who gave us this. I'm not sure if the period belongs here. It's interesting. I noticed that in the way it's framed up here, Shanu hachamim bilshon Mishnah, Baruch shebachar bahem uv'mishnatam. Literally, the sages taught in the language of the Mishnah, comma, blessed be the one who chose them and their teaching. So I don't know if that means that the sages taught the following, or if it is accurately rendered here with the period at the end. Just a declaration, the sages taught in the language of the Mishnah. On that subject of the sages taught in the language of the Mishnah. The commentary that was probably most helpful for me to see here was provided. It's provided on Safaria by Joshua Culp, who's a modern young rabbi, JTS ordained, ordained from the conservative seminary. And he provides a nice commentary here that oh, that's interesting. Judy, you say that your translation doesn't even have that. That would actually back up my view, that it's not actually part of it, that it's like a preamble or a frontispiece or an epigram or something that is intended to just introduce the text. If you're looking off to the right-hand side of the screen now, you probably can see what I'm looking at. The 6th chapter of Avot is not truly part of the Mishnah and was not originally part of Tractate Avot. It is not found in the good manuscripts of the Mishnah, but is generally found in early manuscripts of Tractate Avot as recorded in the Siddur. So that suggests to me, when they say good manuscripts, that's a synonym for the original, the faithful original manuscripts of Avot. So what we're going to be looking at is really an appendix that was apparently only codified in later in the editions of Pirkei Avot that were dropped into the Siddur. You know, the Siddur, the prayer book, is the text of the Jewish people par excellence, or what we call Amcha. It's the book of your people. It reflects the hopes, dreams, aspirations of the community of Israel. As such, the prayer book is by far the most populist and probably popular of all Jewish sacred literature. You may not even think of the Siddur as a text alongside Torah, Mishnah, Talmud, but it is. It's a really important document of both rabbinical thought and a window into their audience, right? What was the community of Israel, the community of the Jewish people like, whom the rabbis are addressing? And so the prayer book is a wonderful window into Jewish history, Jewish society, Jewish culture, Jewish thought, even Jewish law and practice. As such, as an Amcha book, as a book that is really of the people, by the people, for the people, it became customary to include all of Pirkei Avot in a conventional, traditional prayer book. You may even have an Orthodox prayer book that has all of Pirkei, or maybe even a conservative prayer book. I don't know. We don't include it in the Reformed prayer books, probably because it's expensive, more pages, and heavy. But many traditional prayer books have Pirkei Avot as an appendix in it. And it appears that in some of the early Siddurim, the version of Pirkei Avot that is in the Siddur is 6 chapters long, not 5. The original Pirkei Avot, 5 chapters. Okay, he goes on to say, it was added to Avot in the Middle Ages as a result of the custom to learn Avot during the Sabbaths between Pesach and Shavuot. So there you have the story of why Avot got dropped into the prayer book. Since there are 6 Sabbaths between the 2 festivals, Passover, the early spring harvest festival, the festival of matzah and the spring lamb, Shavuot, the festival of the ripening barley, 7 weeks hence. Since there are 6 Sabbaths between the 2 festivals and the original Tractate Avot was only 5 chapters, another chapter was added. The chapter that was chosen was originally part of Tractate Kala, one of the minor tractates. Kala means the bride. It deals with the study of Torah. Yeah, just because a chapter title in Mishnah or Talmud is called something, don't think that it's only about that topic. And is hence called Perek Kinyan Torah, or the chapter meaning the acquisition of Torah. The chapter was chosen because of its similarity in content and style to Avot, and because Shavuot, the holiday which immediately follows the reading of this chapter in synagogues, is the time when the Torah was given. In other words, that's the traditional commemoration of the giving of Torah at Sinai. It takes place on Shavuot. Although this material is not really Mishnah, it has been included in Mishnah Yomit, another Mishnah, since it is now part of, Mishnah Yomit, meaning the edition of the Mishnah that is framed for daily study, Mishnah Yomit, or the daily practice of studying Mishnah, since it is now part of printed editions of the Mishnah. Throughout my commentary, I will call each individual unit a Mishnah, even though this is not truly accurate. The first section of the Mishnah is an introduction. Okay, thank you. He's corroborating what I believe, which lets the reader know that this is not truly part of the Mishnah, but that it is similar to the Mishnah. Though that explains the line here, the sages taught in the language of the Mishnah. So what we're intended to understand here is that this is Mishnaic framing or a Mishnaic kind of writing, and it is no less divinely inspired. Blessed be the one who chose them and their teaching. And then we're going to get into the actual content here. It also contains a short opening praise for God. As we just noticed, these two lines were added in the Middle Ages when this chapter was appended to Avot. So Judy, that explains why your edition may not include it. It's very obviously some kind of drop-in. All right, that's a lot of history that may not interest you so much. Any thoughts or questions before we move on to the, Michelle has a colon after the word Mishnah. Interesting. All right, now we figured it out. That's why you have the commentary online. Okay, so why don't we get into the actual content here? If you're not too troubled that this is not original Mishnah, but this is Mishnah-like material that was included in the Mishnah and now is part of the standard daily practice of studying Pirkei Avot. It's like, I wasn't going to not include it just because it wasn't originally there, but now you know this is, okay, enough on that already. Now the actual text. And you'll see, if you know how to study Mishnah, you'll know how to study chapter 6. Moving forward. Rabbi Meir said, whoever occupies himself with the Torah for its own sake, and we're going to look at the Hebrew phrase for that because it's a very important Hebrew phrase, for its own sake, merits many things. Not only that, but he is worth the whole world. I might challenge the use of the pronoun, but we'll go on. He, meaning whoever occupies himself with the Torah for its own sake, he is called beloved friend, one that loves God, one that loves humankind, one that gladdens God, one that gladdens humankind. So he goes by 5 identifications. And we're going to do the whole text and then break it down. The Torah clothes him in humility and reverence and equips him to be righteous, pious, upright, and trustworthy. It, presumably meaning the Torah, got to keep track of your antecedents here. So what the Torah, and not just the Torah sitting in an ark, never opened, but the Torah that is studied for its own sake. We're going to talk about that phrase as promised. It keeps him far from sin and brings him near to merit. And people benefit from his counsel. Now we're back to the person, his sound knowledge, understanding, and strength. As it is said, and here's a proof text, counsel is mine and sound wisdom. I am understanding, strength is mine, from Proverbs. And it, meaning Torah, bestows upon him, meaning the one who studies Torah, royalty for its own sake, royalty, dominion, and acuteness in judgment. To him, the one who studies Torah for its own sake, are revealed the secrets of Torah. And he, that same person, is made as an ever-flowing spring and like a stream that never ceases. And he becomes modest, long-suffering, and forgiving of insult, and it magnifies him and exalts him over everything. This is a hell of a promise, my friends, right? So let's make sure that we know what the who and what the it is in this text. So the phrase here, Rabbi Meir, can you see where my cursor is flashing? That's the sage. Rabbi Meir, by the way, one of the prominent, I believe, 2nd generation sages of the Mishnah, Omer, he says, kol, there's our favorite word, meaning all, ha'osek, like la'asok b'divrei Torah, kol ha'osek ba'Torah, everyone who immerses or engages or dives into the study of Torah, lishmah, is a really important modifying word, lishmah, literally for its name, idiomatically for its own sake. To do something in both ancient Hebrew and rabbinic Hebrew and modern Hebrew, lishma, means you do it for its own merit. In other words, not to obtain supplemental merit. So a lot of this is about the intention behind your Torah study. 2 analogs, 2 opposites to what is being promoted here. To study Torah to make a living. Like if for me, the study of Torah were chiefly just a tool of the trade, if the primary motivation for my study of Torah would be to make a buck, even as a rabbi, would not be consistent with what Rabbi Meir is promoting here. And therefore would not, the benefits that he describes of engaging in Torah for its own sake would not accrue to me or to one. Lishmah means you got to do it for its own sake. Even further expanding this construct, in Judaism, Torah has to be, Torah and much Jewish practice should not be practiced in the anticipation of or hoping to leverage God for some kind of reward, right? We don't do mitzvot in order to obtain divine favor for doing the mitzvot. The reward for doing a mitzvah, as it says elsewhere in Pirkei Avot, I believe, is the mitzvah itself. The punishment, it goes on to say, for transgressing is the transgression itself, which means that carrying the burden, I think, of the guilt and the shame and the fact that you've transgressed, that's the punishment, not something, in other words, fear of going to Gehenna, Jewish hell, as we've talked about a lot over the last 2 weeks, should not be the primary disincentive against transgression. And the promise or anticipation of going to Gan Eden, Jewish heaven, should not be the primary motivation for doing any mitzvah, least of all studying Torah. You should do it for its own sake. So it really means two things. One, not for any earthly benefit, not to make a buck, and not to derive divine benefit. You don't do it to earn any benefit other than the merit of studying Torah itself. But if you approach it that way, all of these benefits will accrue to you. Does everyone follow my understand, at least how I'm interpreting lishmah, this one little word which means so much? Right? It's a really important word about not just the fact of studying Torah in an immersive way, but the intent behind it has to be for its own sake. Okay. And then we have all of the things that accrue to one who does this, right? So just briefly summarizing, you merit many things. Not only that, but you are worth the whole world. In Hebrew, it says, Zochel lidvarim harbe, very open-ended phrase. You merit, literally, you merit many things. Velo od, not only that, but also ela, shekol haolam kulo, the entire world, chedai hulo. That's a hard phrase. Literally means the entire world is worthwhile for him. The translation here is he merits the entire, or he is worth the whole world. Hard to know exactly what is being meant here, which is why it is helpful that Rabbi Meir clarifies. He becomes or is called, and again, it's not just that other people call him this, it's that you take on a certain identity. So it says nikra, he will be called, he will gain the identity of a rea, which means a friend, ahuv, one who is beloved, ohevet hamakom, one who loves the omnipresent, makom, literally the place, but also the one who is in every place, ohevet habriot, the one who loves creation, misameach et hamakom, the one who causes the omnipresent to rejoice, or who gives delight to the omnipresent, misameach habriot, and who gives delight to creation. In other words, he is a blessing to humanity or all of creation and to God. Let's just take that much. It's a lot in this Mishnah. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts and whether or not your life experience is bearing this out. Do you think that studying Torah for its own sake fundamentally changes who you are and provides you with an identification or an identity as a beloved person, both by God and humanity? Is that happening in your life? Is showing up for Mishnah every week and all the other ways in which you're engaged in Jewish study? And I am allowing you to pat yourselves on the back here. Has it changed you? Can it change you? Are you doing this for its own reward, or are you doing it for some supplemental benefit? Are you doing it for bragging rights among your friends? hey, guess what I learned this week? But this is a chance for us in group to just reflect openly. I'm going to move us to gallery mode, as a matter of fact, on what study means to you, and do you perceive in your own life any of the benefits that Rabbi Meir appears to be promising here. Let's hear from Audrey first, since I see a hand up. Oh, unmute yourself, kindly.
I don't think it enhances me in a public way in any manner whatsoever, but I think it enriches my own personal life and being. I mean, it adds to my thoughts and my experiences, but I don't think it goes beyond even just me, even to my family or anything. It's just within me.
Thank you. Russell.
Well, there's no question that at my next cocktail party, I'm going to drop the name Ben Bag. But, like most New Yorkers, I think I can go for weeks or months or even years without a moment of introspection. And I would say that this study does invite me, I'm sure it invites all of us to converse with ourselves about the questions that matter. I have always believed that I don't go to Judaism for the answers, I go for the questions. And the questions that are posed by you, Rabbi, and by everyone on this call and in Torah study are what I relish. I can't really say more than that. I think it would be self-flattery to say that I have been somehow enlarged by it.
Thank you. Thank you. A gracious and loving compliment nonetheless. Anyone else? Yeah, Barbara. Hi, I see your actual hand. You can chime in.
Why would I do something that wasn't Kidai for me?
Kedai meaning worthwhile.
Right.
Using the same word that this Mishnah.
Yeah, it's a word that I use all the time.
May I jump on that comment in a corroborating kind of way? I want to piggyback here. Many of us who serve in professional Jewish life or synagogue life especially are doing all sorts of anecdotal analytics, a phrase that I came up with just earlier today by way of ad lib, around what are people showing up for and what are people not showing up for in the strange kind of transition from pandemic to endemic times in which we're living, which I think is what this is now. I think we're now wrapping our heads around a new endemic virus that's going to be part of all of our lives. And I've said that several times. I'm not a scientist, but I play one on TV, and I read a lot of science literature and journalism. So best of my ability to surmise, that's where we are right now. But we've been transformed and reformed. Westchester Reformed Temple has done a lot of reforming over the last 2.5 years, individually and as a community and as communities within communities. And, rather than, gnash my teeth and spend a lot of time late at night being vexed that other than the high holidays, attendance is way down for a lot of in-person things, which is not just cautiousness around COVID. That is a piece of it, of course. But it's also that, in a world that has fundamentally shifted people's personal, familial, professional, and social priorities, there need to be different priorities assigned or reassigned to the things that prompt one to make time in their lives for them. Case in point, we had a wonderful turnout for the high holidays this year, both in person and online. We didn't have such a wonderful turnout for Simchat Torah, but that would probably be true in any year. Jewish people tend to value the experience of being with their Jewish communities on Rosh Hashanah more than on Simchat Torah, though I would argue Simchat Torah is by far the more fun experience, Jewishly speaking. But even for something like a Wednesday night session, people are, it's not just that they're burned out, it's that, as somebody pointed out to me the other day, a lot of families in our community, a lot of grown-ups in our community, and a lot of teens in our community who are proving to be the hardest community to engage in person or online are simply trying to make up for lost time, and they want to have dinners and social events with all of the friends they weren't able to see as much over the last 3 years. So that's a long way of saying we all make choices about where we spend our time. My teacher and first rabbinic mentor as a rabbi, Les Gutterman, who had lunch with my dad yesterday. That was just yesterday, right? How's Rabbi Gutterman doing?
He's wonderful, thank you, and sends his warmest personal regards your way.
Great. I think he just turned 80 this month. Yep.
He did, in fact.
So he was my first rabbinic mentor as I was in rabbinical school, and my first senior rabbi when I was an assistant rabbi in his congregation, the congregation where my parents have long affiliated, though they are primarily affiliated at WRT, which is Temple Bethel in Providence, Rhode Island. And Les gave a brilliant Devar Torah once that I've never forgotten. He basically says, well, the two most important Jewish books in your home. Now, this is a little bit dated, by the way, because a lot of people don't have these as physical books anymore. But he said the two most important Jewish books in your home are your checkbook and your date book. Because you can say anything you want about what you think your values are. But if you read where you're sending your money, how you're spending your money, and where your money is coming from, and if you read how you're actually spending your time, that tells you everything you need to know about what you actually value in life. And you can make all sorts of excuses that, well, no, I actually value my family more than my work. But if you're spending 70 or 80 hours at work and not with your family, your date book tells otherwise. Similarly, your checkbook. The things that matter most to me are my children's education. But if you're spending all of your money on Armani suits, okay, well, one could contest your words with your own actions. This is about integrity, my friends, right? It's okay. I'm not scolding. We're all guilty of lack of integrity. It's a universal human flaw. Your date book as a statement of values, right? So where do you spend your time? What Pirkei Avot is arguing for, what Rabbi Meir is basically saying, is if you are making the time to do this thing that we're all doing every Thursday in a concerted way, it changes you. And I don't want to boast. I just want to reflect that I've not done an extended course of study for as long or consistently as I have. Obviously, there are weeks on, weeks off, hiatus periods, but we've been studying Mishnah now for 40 weeks. That's a long time. That's, and normally the longest course I would ever teach at WRT would be 8 weeks long, week. So we've done 5 times that. And I feel changed by this process. I actually feel that Pirkei Avot has become much more of a living text in my life, where I'll be going about my quote unquote day-to-day work, which admittedly involves a lot of teaching and Jewish practice, but I'll be going along, and something that we talked about in class that morning or 3 weeks ago or a year ago will pop back up. And I'll say, wow, this has really become a much more active part of my life. And also being on sabbatical, I adopted a weekly study practice of mystical and Hasidic text. I have a Chavruta partner, Rabbi Jan Katsu, who some of you know. We study Talmud together regularly. So over the last 3 years, Torah lishmah, studying Torah for its own sake, not because I'm teaching a class, but because this is important to me, has changed me, and it's created a kind of bond among us as well. Michelle.
So I hesitate to go too deeply into my personal reflections, but I have a few, or experience, but I have a few observations. So let me just sort of do them. I don't know that anything I experience changes the world, draws love from God or anybody else. I believe, I understand, I think, that an underlying concept here and of Haredi, devotion to intense study, since we talked about that earlier, is that if more people study this, if it is, then it becomes part of the belief system and collectively improves the world.
Yeah.
And so I cannot speak for any intent to do that. I know that there are two types of activities that really make my brain feel really good. And so, lets off endorphins. One is deep study, because I go I read very slowly. I try very hard to think about it, which is very different than how I read the newspaper, which I read multiple newspapers every day, going in that and collecting other information, and I gather information there, but there's a sense of that. The other activity actually is creating art, which is a complete brain flip and just totally different. But I feel sort of the brain, I don't know, what is it, endorphins, feels really good from both of those activities. The other thing I want to just quickly comment on is your ad hoc economics, your view, yes, people vote with their feet, absolutely. And that is, a sound economic principle that you watch what people actually do as opposed to what they say, which is the part of the problem with a lot of the surveys when they ask people what's important to you. Yeah, I can say anything is important to me, and that whatever the current political issue of the day is, right? But the question is, how do we actually act? But a quick snapshot probably doesn't get you the right, a really good sample on which to base decisions.
Yeah, fair point.
Speaking as an economist and analyst.
Fair. Well taken. Doug and Marge, Judy, Norman, in that order, please.
I'll observe that you've known us pretty much your whole life, or actually, in fact, your whole life.
Indeed.
And I think you know that that Mom and I have been, let's just say, involved Jewishly for as long as you've known us, and that's taken on various manifestations and activities over our lives. And for me, this is really another step in taking ownership of my being a Jew. When you do this class from your office, there's this impressive array of books behind you, and I can promise everybody that this is not, in fact, a backdrop like the Pastrami Queen. This is actually your library. And the notion that, we've got these books in our tradition. We have Torah, we have Pirkei Avot, but this is taking ownership of that in a way that's different than having a copy of the book on your bookshelf.
Thank you. I love that. And look, have I read all those books? No. But, part of being a rabbi is you got to know where to find what you need to know.
That's, there's the Sherlock Holmes analogy, the things you keep in your brain tool chest have to be the ones that you need all the time and are readily accessible. And then you need to know where to find the rest.
Yep, we did that. We actually looked at the Brain Addict text. I was thinking about that. Somebody posted a pretty funny meme the other day, which was just a phrase or a tweet that said, "Buying books like I'm immortal." It's pretty funny. It's like, I don't need to buy new books. I have more books than I could ever read in a lifetime. But then somebody will tell me, "Rabbi, I'm reading the most amazing book." Or, I get a lot of first editions of books sent to me from the Jewish Book Council and Jewish Publication Society. It's one of the perks of being a rabbi. I just get a lot of free books. And I either read them or I give them away, or I read them and then I give them away, or I read them and I keep them, or I put them in the temple library, but I cherish them. So thank you I love the idea of owning what it means to be a Jew. That's a beautiful way of expressing what we're here to do. Judy and then Norman, please.
so many thoughts come through my mind and my heart. It's in my neshama and in my kishkas to study Torah. To me also, there's a lifelong learning, which is an overused phrase, but what Michelle said, my brain feels good when I study Torah. And there's so much to learn, and it's so relevant so often to what is happening in the world, even in my personal life.
Mhm.
The thing I also think is, in fact, I love the wrestling idea. And we studied recently with Jane Roberts that we've always, when Jacob becomes Israel, that they say the word Israel is to wrestle. And we have found that the translation is truly to prevail. So in a way, the wrestling is wonderful, but the thought, just the idea of translating a language is fascinating to me. And the word prevail, the word wrestling becomes prevail. Anyway, I love the language. I love the translation and how different translations can be so important and change the meaning. And I think above all, I am so enriched, and I feel it's an individual versus or including community. I feel as an individual, I am tied to the Jewish people through the Torah. I am a Jew, and it's very important for me to be a Jew. So I'm individually a Jew, but I am in a community. And community, as one goes on in life, is so important. So I'm not only individually, but I'm in a community. It just sort of ties the Torah to who I am and to the people that I'm a part of. It's just very, very important to me. And
Beautiful. It's beautiful. Thank you. I love this expression. My brain feels good. I think one of the things that Rabbi Meir wants us as readers to understand here is that it's okay to derive some personal benefit from doing this. That's not the reason you do it,
right?
But one should not be dismissive of the fact that this is good for your neshama, it's good for your brain, and it's good for your character too, right? It's good for your moral development. It's good for how you are perceived by others and ultimately how you are understood by God. It is okay to embrace the benefits that accrue to the person. Otherwise, why would you do it? I mean, yes, we do things out of a sense of obligation because we have to, but the things that we do with our discretionary time, why would I choose to study Torah for its own sake? I think it's okay to acknowledge that because it makes my brain feel good. And that's not a bad reason in and of itself. Norman?
I have tried numerous times in the course of my life to learn Hebrew. It is one of the things that I have not succeeded at, and I am still not giving up. But I was particularly curious. You picked that word. Is it lishmah? Lishmah?
Lishmah, yeah.
Well, you spent so much time talking about it, and I was wondering how you learned that, how you knew all the different aspects and ramifications of that word. I mean, there are thousands of words in the Hebrew language. You went into that in such detail. Tell me, how did you do that?
Well, you know the 10,000 hour rule, right? Like, why were the Beatles the Beatles? One conjecture that was, I think, articulated most compellingly by Malcolm Gladwell, not in his first book, The Tipping Point, and not in his second book, Blink, both of which are great reads, but in his third book, which I thought was not as good a read. But a lot of, I forget what it's called, and that probably is indicative of my opinion of the book overall. But he does suggest that one reason that some people achieve what they achieve is simply a function of how much time they've devoted to that thing. So by the time, Paul McCartney, John Lennon, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr were all 18 years old, they had spent easily 10,000 hours learning their instruments and practicing and performing. Now, maybe. I think it's much more than that. It's much more than that, because there are plenty of people who've spent that time, toiling in a certain vineyard who don't become the Beatles. Mm-hmm. For me, though, there is something to be said for just how much time I spend on these things. Lishmah specifically, I couldn't tell you, but I I'm always drawn to words, wordplay, grammar, etymology. It's just a passion of mine. And so one of the reasons I fell in love with Hebrew young, pursued it vigorously, took 2 years, 4 semesters of university level Hebrew, went to Israel, my first year of rabbinical school, placed in level 3 out of 4 for my Hebrew, my seminary ulpan, but advanced rapidly and went into the highest level where I didn't belong, by the way. I just kept pushing and pushing myself, is because it's something I love. I wanted to spend my 10,000 hours learning Hebrew. And I still, by the way, Norman, I don't want you to feel bad, because I still feel not Hebrew illiterate, but I still feel way, way under-equipped to hold my own in conversations with Israelis. Way under-equipped. And to read an Israeli newspaper in a way that's not even, forget fluency. I'm going for basic conversancy. If you're not native born to a language, or living in a country where that language is spoken every single day and you're encountering it hours and hours and hours every day, or working with coworkers or with roommates who are speaking it, it is almost, I have found, impossible to master a language as an adult. My own view of this is that the only way to truly master a language is just total immersion. It's just so hard. So I took 2 or 3 semesters of advanced Hebrew while on sabbatical. It certainly improved my fluency. Also, I've made a commitment every time I interact with an Israeli to speak only in Hebrew. When I exchange emails with Israelis, I write only in Hebrew, even if they write in English. I'll write back in Hebrew. It might take me a half an hour to write a letter. It's just, why am I spending my time that way? I mean, people might say, Rabbi, you've got congregants who are waiting weeks to see you. Okay. Yes, and like, yes, I of course, I'm a pastor to a congregation of over 1,000 households, which means that my date book is very, very full. But I don't want my date book not to have time for study in it. And I have had, by the way, I've had temple leaders, I've had members of the board and the executive committee and even temple presidents say, I'm not sure you should be spending as much time teaching. Literally, you have a lot of congregants who, for a non-emergent piece of business, right now, the wait list to get to see me is about 3 weeks. I think for a white collar professional, that's reasonable. If you're, but of course, I'll see you tomorrow if you're having a physical or an emotional emergency. If you or someone you love is in the hospital, I'll be right over. I mean, you cancel other appointments. But for standard business, Rabbi, I want to come talk to you about my daughter whose wedding is in 2 years to a non-Jew. Okay, I'll see you, right before Thanksgiving. That's my timeline. And I don't think that trading this off to make room for that. This is all about the date book and checkbook, by the way. I'm just going to follow this up with one thing that Rabbi Gutterman said in that sermon. It's a brilliant sermon. He begins with do you know the most important book, or the most important books in your, most important Jewish books in your home are your date book and your checkbook. And he goes on to say, I couldn't find the time is a really dumb expression, because time isn't lost and we don't find it. We make time, or we allocate time for the things that matter. And that phrase, more than anything in Pirkei Avot, just slams me. I think of that phrase every single week of my life. I make time for the things that matter. Another teaching, this one's really going to rock your boat and probably leave you annoyed at me, but I'm going to share it anyway because I haven't found a way to disprove it, even though I dislike it. And let me say that again. What I'm going to share with you, I haven't found a way to disprove it, even though I dislike it. And that is the phrase, I procrastinated. Okay, I'm a procrastinator. Like it's endemic to my character. I once had a teacher who said, don't tell me that you procrastinated, just say I lack integrity. And I was kind of like blown. I was like, come on, man. He said, no, hear me out. Procrastination is just a lack of integrity. I'm like, that is really harsh. He said, no, hear me out. Procrastination means that you say something is important to you. You acknowledge that something's really important, and then you're not doing it. And so you say, I'm procrastinating. Another way of saying that is it's not actually as important to you as you say it is, which is a lack of integrity. Literally, it's not integrated in you. What you say is important and what you're actually doing. Like I said, I don't like it, but I haven't found a way to disprove it. And it comes up for me all the time. I've shared it with other students. Bar mitzvah kid, they're not ready to hear that yet. 13-year-old who's not practicing for his bar mitzvah isn't ready to hear you lack integrity. They also don't understand what that means. But so I don't use it as a cudgel. I use it as a conversation opener. Like, what do we mean when we say I procrastinate? We're just rationalizing the fact that that the thing we think is important isn't as important as we say it is. Okay, that's fine. We all do that. Like he also said, oh, what was the line? It's like, something about your shoes. Your shoes can tell you how much integrity you have because you put on your shoes telling you that you're going for a 5-mile run or something like that. But what you're actually doing with them is walking into a bakery and buying a donut. It's like, I have to get the actual line on that. He was a very funny teacher. All right, the pastrami queen has the floor.
Well, thank you very much. First place, I would disagree with your friend in a couple of respects. One of them is that I have raised procrastination to an art, and that is a form of integrity. As
long as you know you're doing it.
Oh, I consciously, with purpose and with aplomb.
There you go.
But I would say that we don't only procrastinate on things that we can ostensibly consider important. We also procrastinate on things that we don't consider important, but we just kind of have to do. And so I think it is more an assessment of priorities than it is a form of hypocrisy or an erosion of integrity. Second thing I want to say is that, going back to why we study this, when I was a child growing up, my grandfather lived with us. My grandfather had been ordained an Orthodox rabbi in Vilna, Lithuania, and he carried Pirkei Avot with him wherever he went. Every single thing that happened in life, like when the Carvel truck did not come around one day, had an answer in Pirkei Avot as far as he was concerned. When you're 7 years old, that is a very annoying grandparent to have living with you. But when you're 17 years old, it's not annoying at all. In fact, my grandfather was a hero to all of my friends and to me. And I was drawn to these sessions not merely to have the privilege of studying with you, Rabbi, and with the rest of this group, but also to connect with those lessons that were wasted on me. But even though my grandfather was not a rabbi in the United States, he nonetheless never would give up his connection to these traditions. One of the stories of the Torah that has always moved me is the story where Jacob tricks his brother out of his birthright. And, I can't stand Jacob. I think he's a putz. But what moves me about that story is that Esau did not value his legacy. He gave up a legacy, but he didn't value it. And I sometimes look at myself and I say, that's me. If you don't value your legacy, if you don't, this gift that has been given to you, then you may as well sell it for a bowl of oatmeal. So I think that it is a way of not being duped out of what rightfully belongs to us. And the final thing I will say, a question, one of my favorite trivia questions, something everyone in Scarsdale should know. How many of the Beatles' wives grew up in Scarsdale?
Ooh, I don't know at all.
The answer is 2. They are.
And who were they?
They are Linda Eastman, whose father, Lee Eastman, was an entertainment lawyer who happened to have been my father's law partner, and Yoko Ono.
Really?
Yes.
Fascinating. Thank you for sharing. And thank you for sharing all of that.
And Yoko Ono lived on the corner of Carthage Road and Heathcote Road
No kidding.
when she was young. That's correct.
Wow. I guess I don't know if that has anything to do with her worldview or her art. She does a lot of screaming. So just saying.
And did
I
she
can't
value
really
her
listen
legacy?
to a lot of Yoko Ono
And
as a
did she
solo
value her-
artist.
Did she value her legacy?
Exactly. Yeah. But in fact, the conclusion of that famous folktale about Jacob and Esau and the bowl of stew for which Esau gives it all up is, thus did Esau spurn his birthright. Where I think the Hebrew word for spurn is bazah. I have to look that up. Yibzeh. Bet Zion Hey. See, sorry, Norman. This is the stuff I grok to. It's like, I know it the way you know Israeli history, truthfully. I mean, Norman does himself a disservice by beating himself up over the Hebrew root words he does not know. What he won't tell you is what an incredibly voluminous capacity for Jewish learning, especially history, he does know. So, it's like what my dad said before about the Sherlock Holmes Watson conversation about the brain attic. You put in there what you think you're going to need the most. So yeah, mine is full of Hebrew root words, and unfortunately, often deficient in terms of remembering where my car keys went. That's just, I'm terrible with that. I don't even, and I'm a 49-year-old man, and I literally just cannot keep track of basic personal effects. So there it goes. Audrey, why don't you chime in, and then I'll take the last word for today's study. Really grateful. I wanted to have this open, expansive dialogue around chapter 6, Mishnah 1, recognizing that it's not a true Mishnah, it's an appendix, but it is an invitation for us to be self-reflective about the meaning of our study and what Rabbi Meir is really talking about. And it's really all a reflection on what it means to study lishmah for its own sake. Audrey, please.
I guess when Russell was talking about Jacob and how he stole the birthright, it made me, of course you won't like this, but what's wrong with us as a people? We cherish, we practically sanctify Jacob, King David, we're the people of the house of David, et cetera, and these weren't nice people.
Mm-hmm.
What's wrong with us? What's wrong with us? I mean, this is pretty terrible.
It is. And on the other hand, I often use the character defects of the biblical so-called heroes and heroines as a relatable window into which young people and old people can find a human connection with the stories that the Torah is trying to tell. Like for me, the fact that we tell these stories about people with such obvious flaws, the way in which the combination of their determination, somebody else talked today about what Jacob really is. He's the one who strives and prevails and struggles and wrestles, but he's also this character who vexes Russell to no end. And he is a person who undergoes tremendous personal transformation. And he's a person who can't resist the urge to curse some of his sons on his deathbed when he's supposed to be blessing them. And he's a fractured, feeble old man who, when the Pharaoh asks him, "How old are you?" he decides instead to talk about how much he's suffered in his life. Like, how human is Jacob? You may not like him, but look at the whole character arc of Jacob and see what it means to be a human being. That, for me, is, again, I'm not really interested in venerating the characters as exemplars or paragons of virtue. I am interested in reading and studying Torah for what it offers about what it means to be a human being. And some people have said, well, why not just study Shakespeare? Shakespeare does an equally good job, and I agree. The only difference is, and now this will be the last thing I say, is that, and I'll go and let Norman chime in too, is that that's not our bichorah. That's the word for birthright. Shakespeare is not the birthright of the Jewish people. It is a treasure.
Right.
Please study Shakespeare. Please learn from Shakespeare what it means to be a human being. I would argue if Rabbi Meir were around and had said, one who studies Shakespeare lishmah becomes all of the same things that one who studies Torah lishmah becomes. You become a more wise, sensitive, compassionate human being. I believe in that because I believe in the power of literature to transform life. And Shakespeare is not the Bechorah of the Jewish people.
Right.
I don't think we study this literature because God commands us to. I think we study this literature because it is our birthright and because it is exquisitely attuned to all of the dimensions of what it means to be a person and a Jew. Oh, okay, there's my manifesto. Norman?
But with regard to human shortcomings, in Christianity, Jesus is the perfect person. In Islam, Muhammad is the perfect person. In Judaism, nobody is the perfect person.
Right. Moses is really human.
Mhm.
And from his quote unquote speech impediment to his insecurities about leadership to his short temper, which gets him in a lot of hot water several times in his career, murdering a task person, whatever you think of that, it's an act of social justice, it's an act of protest, but he murders an Egyptian taskmaster and has to run for his life. You could have asked Moses, so how's that form of leadership working out for you? But he also learns and grows from it. He learns to lead through words and not through fists. And yet still at the end of his life, or toward the end of his career, he can't help but use his fists, right? When God says, just speak to the rock, just speak to it and water will issue forth. He's so angry at the people for kvetching, which I don't blame him. I've led the Jewish people too a little bit, not for 40 years, but they do kvetch. And sometimes if you have a rod in your hand, you have to be careful what you might do with it. And he smashes the rock twice. He's so angry. He hasn't exactly learned, even by the age of 100 and something or other, not to use his fists to lead the people. And God says, you know what? I think it's time for somebody else to lead the people. I'm both tremendously sympathetic to who Moses is at that point in his life and sympathetic to God's decision. Like, yeah, I don't think you should be leading anymore. But how human? So thank you, Norman. Yes, we don't have deities. We don't make deities of our folkloric heroes. We reveal their humanity, I think, to the end that we have much to learn from it. Steve?
But exactly, in terms of the wisdom and blessing of Torah, it's exactly that. In terms of the wisdom, Shane, what it means to be human is that we do all have imperfections, but in spite of that, we all have the opportunity to strive towards righteousness. And God is encouraging all of us to do it. But it's a recognition throughout Torah that we do have our flaws, but that's not an excuse. If anything, you're being given a wonderful opportunity to continue to move forward in a better way.
I value that insight so much. I also value the insights that were shared in the chat window today. So before I end the Zoom, if you haven't taken a look, there's some nice discourse that's happened there. None that requires further comment from me. Only to say thank you for joining us for this study. We do resume next Thursday rather. Please forgive me. You won't see me on a bima for the next couple of Friday nights just because I have more wedding travel, which is wonderful to be part of family simchas, but it's also taking me out of the office a little bit. But if you like any of the other rabbis or cantors at WRT, and you'd be a fool not to, you should come and join us in person. Services have moved indoors. You can also stream online. And I'm just thinking about any other temple programming. I think actually we eased off for maybe a few days for Cheshvan. There are no Jewish holidays until Hanukkah, but take a look at the website and today's e-blast to find out all the nice things that are happening at WRT. And if not before next Thursday, I will see you in a week.
Yashikoa, Rabbi.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, friends. Thanks for a great conversation on that last Mishnah. Really appreciate it. Bye.
Thanks so much for everything.
Thank
Wonderful.
you. Bye-bye.